Well, over at our friend Instapundit, there's an article that says radical Islamists raised $3 million to buy Scottish island for a new homeland. I don't care about that at all. I do have a question, though. It raises an interesting thought experiment, so let's talk about that. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And gentlemen, this is something I've actually given a fair amount of thought to on and off over the years, especially as things seem to be going downwards and we seem to be losing so many of our freedoms and our ability to do what we want to when we want to. I've actually given some serious thought to the idea, and I wanted to discuss with you the idea that is it possible to buy sovereignty and create a country that is freer than America is today? In other words, create a country with a government that fit back in the box that our government originally came in. And I'm not the only person to be thinking about this. The great thing about America has always been that America was always the land of freedom that people in oppressed countries could go to in order to be left alone. And it seems like every day that goes by in America, we get left alone less and less and less and less and less. So my question to both of you is, it's kind of a two-part question. We'll start with you, Steve. Is it possible, let's say you had all the conservatives in the country get together and chip in a couple $1,000. You had a significant budget. You bought a decent-sized island somewhere. If you bought that island from, just for the sake of the argument, let's say you bought it from India. Okay, you buy Diego Garcia or something, right? Can you buy sovereignty? Because if you're a province of any other country, you're essentially subject to their laws. And what I'm interested in is it possible to find a place on planet Earth where you are subject to your own laws and your own government? I guess it's basically the argument that the Confederates were making, although I've got a much higher moral purpose for that than human slavery.
Yeah. Well, you can't buy sovereignty from the IRS, not without renouncing your citizenship. They'll tax you wherever you are. They don't.
I'm assuming that you would. I am assuming off the bat that you would renounce your citizenship.
You would have to, because the IRS. Oh man, we have, as far as I'm aware, the only internal taxation code that includes money you make overseas. And they don't care. You could be on the space station, you can be in Russia, you could be inside. The IRS doesn't care. They're going to find you. So, yeah, you have to renounce your citizenship. You know, there's a theme that's been bubbling around for at least a couple of decades now, that if we blow it here in America, there's nowhere else to go. There's no other frontier. There's no other place to get left alone. And believe it or not, the first time I heard that theme expressed, it was in a speech at a convention that my grandfather gave to the Association of Steel Distributors back in like 1982 or 83. And the last line of the speech, I can't remember the setup exactly, but I'll never forget the last line of the speech. It stuck with me all these decades, was that it would be the saddest thing, a failure on our part, if someday we have to tell our children or grandchildren, once upon a time there was a place called America. And as we get further and further away from our constitutional roots, as we get less and less liberty as the founders understood it, I feel like we're getting closer and closer to that time, even though the country still looks the same on the outside. We have the same mountains, the same fields, the same prairies, and all the rest. But it has a much different feel than it did even just when I was in high school or my 20s. That's a very sad thing. So can we go somewhere else? Can we get sovereignty? Various libertarian groups have tried this over the years with varying degrees of almost comical lack of success, I'm afraid to say, because I've always been cheering them on. Whereas, I think one group got one of those platforms in the North Sea that the Brits put up during World War II for anti-aircraft gun platforms, and we're gonna homestead here. There's a proposal. I think the tech bros are doing this now. They're going to build a floating island and try to make that sovereign. There was even a book that came out in the 90s called The Sovereign Individual that argued, and this is in 1990s money, if you've got $100 million, that's the price for becoming a sovereign individual. You can get a diplomatic passport from I think the Maldives, so you've got protection anywhere you go, but you got to pay like $2 or $10 million for it, whatever that was, and basically set yourself up as a free roaming citizen of the world with no ties to any actual place. But that doesn't work for very many people, does it? That $100 million buy-in, which is probably closer to $250 million today, that's a little pricier than most people can afford. And the point of it is, the whole point of our founding is that these inalienable rights of ours are granted to us by nature or God, depending on your preference. And it's supposed to be for everybody, literally everybody, not just people who can buy in. So, Bill, to answer your question, number one, can you do it? With great expense and difficulty, I suppose. But my point is, you shouldn't have to. We got to win it back.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm not for a second saying give up the fight. I'm just talking about this as a thought experiment in case things continue to go the way that they're going to go, or the way that they appear to be going now. I'm utterly convinced we're going to win this fight, and I just want that on the record. But as a thought experiment, it does interest me. It interests me in the same way that Gulch interested me. The idea that if you were to take the really productive people who self-selected, because that's what America was. America was, after its founding, America was the place where the people who had ambition, hard work, willingness to take risks, self-selected, and went there and created the most amazing country in the history of the world. And now I'm thinking, well, if the inertia of all of these social programs and all of these intrusions on our rights are turning this into something different. You mentioned how sad it would be to say that there was once a place called America. And my entire argument is, I don't think America's a place. I think America's an idea. And I think you could take that idea and put it any place. So, Scott, I guess what I'm talking about is well, Gulch is already taken. So let's say we had a place called Galtigan's Island, let's say you were able to pull it off, and all of your rights were protected, and there was no infringement. Look, I visited Texas longer than that, 7-8 years ago for Thanksgiving, and as a Californian, my entire vocabulary in Texas, 50% of the words I spoke in Texas when I was there were, they let you do that? I'm not joking. If the country goes the way of California, where everything that is not mandatory is forbidden, I'm interested in this idea because I look back at the American Revolution, Scott, and you know so much about this time period, and we think, oh, it was the Americans versus the British, but it wasn't. It was the British versus the British, and these men who led this revolution had to fire on their own flag. They had to fire on redcoats. They were redcoats. This was their own army they were firing on, and there came a point when they felt that the king and the British Army and the Royal Navy and all the rest of it no longer was on their side. And so they had to go through the difficult process of giving up emotionally their allegiance to what they had loved in favor of an idea that they loved more. And that's kind of the essence of this thought experiment. I can think of, up until relatively recently, I could not think of a freer place than America, but I can now. And that's a sad, sad, sad thing to admit.
When the American Revolution happened, we tend to idealize that time and think, oh, well, all the colonists rose up and, threw off the shackles of their British overlords. But you're right, it was British fighting the British in most cases, although we had a bunch of Germans here too and some others. But it was a relatively small percentage of people who actually supported the revolution early on. And it didn't go great. It dragged on for years with no obvious American victories and with General Washington's army basically fleeing from place to place to get away from the redcoats. And so I think we tend to idealize not only that, our founding era, but I think we also tend to underestimate what we have now. Yeah, you can buy an island somewhere, and boy, I'd really love our new sovereign nation. It's the people that I don't like. Like when I think, how do you populate this place? You just run an ad in the paper and go, hey, this is my manifesto. You want to come and join me in this place? And you're going to wind up with a lot of people where you go, whoa, dude, no, not that. This is not what we're talking about.
I have a solution to this problem.
I am often in conversations with people. At first, you're like this. You're just nodding along. You're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden, it takes a turn, and you're like, whoa, no. We're not going there. This is not what I'm not on board with this. And it's unbelievable to me how many times I have people who I think I agree with initially, who then say something that's so far off my reservation that I go, how did you think you even had permission to say that to me? Like, what was it? Did my facial expression invite that in some way? I am not with you. So I would just say this. It's kind of like a perpetual motion machine. It's a great idea, but very, very difficult, if not impossible, to build. And if you've got one that's working pretty good, I'd say hang on to that one. And as Steve suggested, or let me say it this way, as Benjamin Franklin suggested, we've got a republic if you can keep it. And so and I know you're just doing this as a thought experiment, but I think that Galt's Gulch only works because the arrogant author of that book thought that the people who lived there would all be intellectuals like herself and would all, share all her views, and that would be the ideal place. I think part of what makes America, the United States of America, a magical nation in a sense, is that we have managed to bring in people from all over the world and still hold on to that idea. And everybody's got a different read on what that means to them. But we haven't destroyed it. And then I'll end with this. We do need to get Bill Whittle the hell out of California.
Well, I would like to say that that this melting pot idea of people coming here and starting new lives as Americans is as intact as it always is, or always was. But clearly, one of the reasons I brought this up is because we're seeing more and more immigrants coming to this country, not to become Americans, but to take advantage of the American economy and to maintain their own national identities and all of these other things. We've seen all this division along racial lines, national lines, religious lines, and all the rest of it. It's a thought experiment, and it's a utopian thought experiment, which means it's destined to fail. But as far as Scott's point about all kinds of freeloaders and other people just deciding to come hitch a ride, when I said an island, I don't know if I remember if I said tropical island, but if I did, I didn't mean that. If there is ever going to be another republic for us to move to, my absolute 100% conviction is it's got to be someplace very, very, very cold, because you can't be lazy and stupid where it's very cold. Alaska's a possibility. Antarctica's probably a better one. It's got to be a place that's so challenging to live in that your desire to be free is going to overcome your desire for comfort and ease. And that, to me, is what forged the American character, is the idea that people who may have led poor lives in slums, as my family did, in northwest England or wherever you're from, they had the gumption to get up and go someplace that they didn't know anything about and make something better. And they're people who are running the country now are making it harder to make something new and better. But yes, like all utopian ideas, you see the sunny side of it, you don't see the downside of it. I bring it up as a thought experiment only because I like to envision what the America of the future could be like. And it looks a lot more like the America of the past than it does of the America of the present. This is where the definition of conservative for me has always been, I am trying to conserve classical liberal ideas against the onslaught of people who are trying to destroy things like freedom of speech, private property, individual responsibility, the right to defend yourself. All of these fundamental freedoms are under assault. And it interests me to look at what the future of a society based on those principles would look like, mostly as a template for what I'd like to see happen here, right here in America, because I'm not going anywhere, and Steve and Scott aren't either, and neither is Right Angle, so there you go. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on Galtigan's Island, or either that or here next week in our same boring, stupid old America.